Good morning, everyone. We'll be starting in just a few moments. Okay, I think we're going to wait one more minute and then we will start here. Thanks for your patience. All right, well, happy Sunday morning to everyone. My name is Miles Glancy. I am the General Manager of Philharmonia Baroque Orchestra and Chorale. I'd like to welcome all of our 2020 virtual members to our next installment of Jews in Music with scholar in residence Francesco Spagnolo and composer Yotam Haber. Before we begin, I'd like to give everyone a quick crash course on Zoom webinar. As always, first of all, your camera and microphone are disabled throughout this event. We're unable to see or hear you. At the bottom of your screen, you'll find a Q&A button. If you click on this tab, you're able to type and submit questions to our panelists at any time. These questions will be reviewed throughout the event, and at the end, we'll try and get through questions you might have. If you need assistance with tech support at any time, you can feel free to use the chat feature, also down at the bottom of your screen, or you can email info@philharmonia.org, and Naren will be able to help you out there. I must remind you that with all live streamed events, we may experience some connectivity issues and sound or video blips, and we apologize in advance if that does happen, and we thank you for your patience. I'd now like to introduce PBO's Executive Director, Courtney Beck.
Thanks so much, Miles. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Jews in Music, JAMOnline. The JAMOnline programs have actually become so popular, and it's great to see you here today on this very sunny Sunday morning. What began 5.5 years ago in a single sold-out performance at the San Francisco JCC has blossomed into a full series, including tours to Harvard, Yale, the University of Chicago, Dartmouth, and an upcoming tour to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York next September. I want to thank our generous supporters, starting with our lead sponsor, the Corrette Foundation, for providing the resources and vision to make Jews in Music just as rich and meaningful in the digital space. All of our concerts, dialogues, and seminars in this time will become part of a permanent body of work that we can share with audiences everywhere, long after the pandemic is over. I also want to thank the Ross E. Armstrong and Jonas J.K. Stern Jews in Music Fund, the Gaia Fund, the Marmor Foundation, the Bernard Osher Foundation, and the Bloom Music Foundation. Jews in Music scholar in residence Francesco Spagnolo has been at the center of our JAM program since the very beginning, and he's helped to shape far-reaching and probing content without any borders. He's a multidisciplinary scholar focusing on Jewish studies, music, and digital media, and at UC Berkeley, he's the curator of the Magnus Collection of Jewish Art and Life. Dr. Spagnolo is also host for the cultural programs of Italian National Radio in Rome. Francesco will be joined today by composer Yotam Haber. Yotam was born in Holland and grew up in Israel, Nigeria, and Milwaukee. His eclectic catalog includes works for instrumental ensembles, string quartets, choruses, solo voices, and electronics. Since 2008, Haber has been developing work inspired by the music of the Jews of Italy. From the age of the ghettos to the 20th century, he's a recipient of a Kusevitsky Commission, a Fromm Music Foundation Commission, the Rome Prize, and a Guggenheim Memorial Foundation Fellowship, to name just a fraction of his many accolades. Philharmonia is the only major American orchestra with a permanent program focused on Jews and music and the cultural, social, and political influences that inform the creation of art by and for Jews and non-Jews alike. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Francesco Spagnolo and composer Yotam Haber, Italian Jewish music. Enjoy.
Thank you, Courtney. And
Thank you,
good to
Courtney.
see you, Yotam.
Great to see you, Francesco.
How are you?
I am very, very well. And it's exciting for me to be here and talk about something that you and I have both spent literally decades thinking about.
Yeah. It's just for those of us who are watching from home, Yotam and I actually never met in person, but our paths have been crossing for, I don't know, about 15 years now. And we started with email conversations. We did meet in person at one point, but we never really worked together. We never sat down to work together. That's what I was trying to suggest. And so most of our communications are electronic, and we have seen how our paths have been overlapping in all kinds of ways. For me, it's been extraordinary to see how the work I've done on musical archives is being deployed in actual composition and performance, and acquiring new sonorities, new soundscapes, and really unforeseeable audiences. So today, what we're doing is that we're going to explore, Yotam, your path through the sources of Italian Jewish music and your compositional path around that. We've asked you to offer a few samples of your work outside of this, and we do have a slideshow that's starting just to help us situate us in our conversation. So thank you, Miles, for running, Miles Glancy, for running the slideshow as we chat today. And so, you know, Courtney just gave you a pretty comprehensive biography and highlights of your work. I guess that the one thing that I would add, aside from the fact that you're a multi-continental person and clearly versed in all kinds of sounds and musical styles, is that a reason we met, and we'll go deeper into that, is that you received a Rome Prize, and you spent a year at the American Academy in Rome. That was like, I think, around 2007, right? 2007.
That's right. Yeah.
And but you arrived to that, and you continue that with also music from all kinds of other connections. And you selected a short video to kind of introduce yourself. Can you just say a few words about what we're about to watch?
I spent 6 years teaching in New Orleans, and one project that I did there is called New Water Music, sort of a companion piece to Handel's Water Music. We worked with the Louisiana Philharmonic Orchestra and hundreds of volunteer musicians, volunteer fishermen. We worked with a choreographer that did the boat choreography in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. And so we had an actual boat choreography with about 10 musicians on each boat on the waterways of New Orleans. It was very exciting work that in some ways was calling attention to the very alarming loss of land and water and impeding water in the coastline of Louisiana.
So let's watch this video that kind of summarizes and introduces this project that looks back and looks at the present of both music and society.
You can only go as far up as you bend down. The wave doesn't equal silence, inexistence, enlightenment. Think about it.
In the beginning, all I knew was that I wanted to write a piece that involved the orchestra and water and the community.
The proponents for restoring the coast of Louisiana get away with using these large-scale freshwater diversion to flood our brackish waters with Mississippi River shitwater. There's not going to be enough seafood in this area for us to eat, much less have a business out of it.
I didn't enter this project a coastal activist. I entered it as a New Orleans homeowner who doesn't want my house underwater.
So looking back at musical past and find new context for it seems to be a signature of the work that you do. In the case of Italian Jewish music, there are actually many sources. You know, as you know well, and I think people watching us from home know very well, the bulk of Jewish musical tradition is transmitted orally. So it's hard to find written documentation that brings us back to what music used to sound in the past. In the case of Italy, we are in a little bit of luck, mostly because of the great tradition of Italian musicianship. And Jews living in the Italian peninsula kind of absorb that, learn to write music. And at times, like what we're looking at now, this is the middle of the 17th century, they would actually use musical notation to write down their own traditional melodies. So this, what we're seeing here is a manuscript. Actually, the current whereabouts of the manuscripts, this manuscript are unknown. It was sold at an auction a few years ago. It used to be at the Montefiore Library in London. But we do have reproductions, etc., so we can still study it. And this is an example of actually a synagogue cantor writing down what he had learned from his teacher and using musical notation. So the music goes from left to right. We see clef signature, a marking of tempo, but then all of the annotations and how to sound the music is written in Hebrew, and the Hebrew is written from right to left. And the audience in the programs of Jewish music are already familiar with this interesting conundrum of how to bring together both Hebrew and musical notation when there is a simple challenge, which is that the two go in two opposite directions on the page. I was saying we're in luck because Italian Jews of all Jewish communities were able to write down music early on, and they also were in a place in which the cultural exchanges with non-Jews and their musical lore were pretty consistent. And a case in point, and one that really has inspired Yotam Haber's composition work, is that of Benedetto Marcello, an author that is very well known to our audiences. In the next slide, and in the meantime, I hope that Yotam is going to be able to rejoin us in video. There might be some connection problems over there. Miles, feel free to jump back in if you need to help us solve problems. But in the meantime, I'm going to keep explaining this, which was my part of the conversation, hoping that Yotam can jump back.
I am here, Francesco. I can hear you just fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just don't see you on camera. So good to know. So this is an example of something that actually has inspired you in all kinds of ways, as we will see. It's a transcription of a melody, and it's a pool of 11 melodies that were transcribed from 2 synagogues in Venice in the early 1700s by the Venetian composer Benedetto Marcello. And it's a transcription of a verse of Psalm 114. What's interesting in the work that both Yotam and I have been doing in very different directions is that we are comparing these musical notations with 20th century sound recordings that document the oral tradition in Italian synagogues. The leading scholar that did these recordings was Leo Levi. You see him underneath the portrait of Benedetto Marcello. Leo Levi was born in Turin in 1912. He was actually born near Turin and died in 1982. And throughout the 1950s and early 60s, he documented about 27 different oral traditions across the Italian peninsula. He also documented himself singing. So this is actually a recording of himself that we're going to listen in a second, singing essentially an oral variant of the melody that Benedetto Marcello notated in the 1700s. So about 300 years later, the same melody was still in play in the oral tradition of Italian Jews. Let's just hear a little bit of it, a little snippet. Thank you, Miles, for playing it for us.
בחג, בשרשרת הזאת, המנגינה של פסח הייתה מנגינה של ביצי ישראל. כלומר, מנגינת בצאת ישראל הייתה למנגינה לייט מוטיב של פסח. והיא בצאת ישראל ממצרים, בית יעקב מעם לועז, הייתה יהודה לקודשו, ישראל עמם שלו טוב.
So in this case, we have to listen to a 20th century field recording, compare it to a transcription from the 18th century, and find music through this. By the way, Leo Levi was being interviewed in Jerusalem, so he was speaking Hebrew with a delightful Italian accent for those from home who are into these kinds of things. And just to show you that there is a bounty of these things, meaning of the correspondences between notation and contemporary music. Here's another example. This is a key liturgical poem for the Jewish high holidays, and we hear it in a transcript. We see it in a transcription from Venice from the 18th century, and hear it in a field recording made by Leo Levi in Venice, so same place, roughly 300 years later.
Sofet colares veoda bemishpat yangamil nachaim vachesed ngam ganitasmil vedot tefilat asachar במקום מולת העמים.
Perfect. And so, Yotam, this is just to give our audience a sense of what the materials were. And these materials including, I know exactly because I cataloged them, 1,092 recorded items that Leo Levi recorded, and they are now cataloged in the archives of the National Music Academy in Rome, the Accademia di Santa Cecilia. So in 2017, you moved to Rome. You 2007.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, 2007. You went to Rome, and you kind of entered this world of archives. I'm always fond of saying that archival collections are a little bit like time bombs. You know, they're set, and you never know when they will go off and exactly what time. And in this case, this archive kind of exploded with your interest. So can you tell us a little bit about your encounter in Rome with this?
Yeah, it's funny that number 1,092. I remember that distinctly, and I remember spending hours in this photograph where we see exactly where I sat and listened to these recordings that you worked on so much. And I found them really entrancing. I've been thinking, leading up to this conversation today, why have I had this fascination with music of the Italian Jews for so long? And I'm not quite sure. I think it has something to do with this this idea of being kind of a musical nomad, and this fascination with the music of another tribe. In a sense, that's why when I came across the work that Benedetto Marcello did, this Christian composer living in Venice, entering a synagogue, or perhaps more than one synagogue. We're not so sure exactly how many synagogues he went to. And I can sort of imagining him sitting in the back and listening very intently and transcribing what he heard. He wrote in the preface for the first edition to his 50 psalms that he calls estro poetico armonico, 50 cantatas setting the psalms. He wrote that if you today in the 18th century go to Venice, you can hear in the Venetian synagogues the music that was passed down to the Jews on Mount Sinai. And that is such a beautiful, fantastical idea that stuck with me. This it's an idea that's sort of doomed in a way. Any one of you who has ever played the telephone game as a child and realized that, you know, just a few iterations in a circle, you already find the errors in transmission. Imagine the generations of people that have been passing this music orally, not transcribing it. What happens to that tradition? And that's coupled with this idea that fascinates me of the ta'ameh hamikra, the diacritical marks that we have in the Torah, that we've had in the Torah from, I believe, since around the 9th century. But Francesco, correct me if I'm wrong.
Then, yeah.
And so these are little, I'm sure you all know, but these are little memory aids on top of the text that we also find in the music of the Christian world, or starting around the 9th century as well. There are memory aids. They're not going to tell you exactly how you intone something, but they help out if you already know that melody. And the idea that music that is transmitted, of course, is constantly in a state of flux, but music that is so holy to so many people that changes much slower than music that is vernacular music. So this idea that perhaps things were moving a little bit more glacially from generation to generation than, say, pop music. There's something very special about the way that you intone, say, Bereshit bara ha'olam, the opening lines of Genesis, the book of Genesis. There's a significance and a symbolism to singing that line in a downward melodic line versus singing it in an ascending line. What does that mean? Does God come down to earth? Do people come up to God? And these are things that don't change just when one cantor wakes up on a Saturday morning and says, I think I'm going to sing it this way today. It just doesn't happen. And that idea of trying to maintain a tradition and yet failing at it just by virtue of the vagaries of time. I love that idea, the imperfection of trying to maintain a tradition.
So when you were in the archives, you became pretty fascinated. You were living in Rome, specifically with the oral traditions of the Jewish community of Rome. And I remember that's kind of when we started corresponding. And I know you were fascinated because you felt that you had been listening to very, very ancient sounds. And I know myself and other colleagues in other musicology colleagues were sort of trying to tell you gently that maybe what you were listening was not as ancient as you were imagining it to be. And again, sort of like the unruliness of the past in general, and the musical past seems to be like a very important aspect of the conversation with sounds that you have. We have a slide that shows actually a kind of through images what you were confronted with.
Right.
To this day, if one visits Rome, one sees the Great Synagogue, which is on our screen on the left, which was actually built in 1904. And the Roman Jewish community is indeed one of the most ancient in the diaspora. It actually, in a way, predates the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem. It's, Jews have been in Rome for thousands of years, but they used to live in a, let's say, musically and culturally much less centralized way, even though they lived in the ghetto. And we see on the right a photograph of the ghetto, and I think there is a wrong caption there. It's actually the ghetto. It's not the Accademia Nazionale Santa Cecilia. But these things happen with slideshows. The ghetto was actually established around the same time in 1555, and it evolved into having 5 synagogues in the same building. There were synagogues with traditions from various parts of Spain, of course, Italy, but also southern Italy. There was a Sicilian synagogue in the ghetto of Rome. And they all shared the same building, but their sounds were very different. So they would have sung the words that you were saying earlier, Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. They would have sung it to very different and discordant melodic traditions. So the issue is not only trying to and failing at keeping the tradition, but also understanding that tradition can have multiple and very divergent sounds. And that was in a way how we met. I remember over email, and I remember disappointing you here and there with my replies. And then really fantastic work came together, because I was confronted with a new composition that you, in a way, dedicated to Leo Levi, the person, implicitly dedicated to Leo Levi, the person who recorded these sounds in the 1950s. And that mixed the sounds that I had been bringing out of the archive, publishing, and sharing. So we do have some samplings of this composition, which dates from 2008. The title is Death Will Come and She Shall Have Your Eyes, which is after a poem by Italian poet Cesare Pavese, who was dear to Leo Levi. And I think you encountered that poetry because you were also in touch with Leo Levi's family, with his children.
Right. Yeah. I asked Leo Levi's daughter what was some poetry that was important to Leo Levi, and she said, well, Levi loved Cesare Pavese, and in fact he was the first to translate it to Hebrew and published it in Israel. So in this 5-movement work for mezzo-soprano, string orchestra, and the recordings that Leo Levi made, I use the poem in several different ways. Sometimes it's being sung in the original Italian. Sometimes it's being sung in the translation to Hebrew that Leo Levi made. But there's many other texts. It's a kind of a puzzle, this piece. There's so many words and so many different layers of meaning in the one movement. The first movement begins with the papal bull that was written in 1555 that created the ghetto in the first place, and that's being sung to a melody that Leo Levi collected. So there's multi-purposing and layers of meaning in this work.
So we're going to play a couple of samples from this work from 2008. We're scrambling the order of the movements and really going after sounds. This is the recording is a cantor reciting the opening lines of the Hebrew Bible, and then a lot more happens.
Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'aretz ve'aretz hayidata u'bavo ve'chashech al pnei te'am ve'ruach Elohim merachef al pnei hamayim vayomer Elohim meyar vayi har vayar Elohim edar echitar vayavdel Elohim benar ubenachosher vayikra Elohim lareyam velachosher kar layla vayinerem vayivaker yamekah.
So a lot going on, a lot of different sounds coming together. In a way, one sees the mark, even in that short 1-minute video that we saw about your New Water music composition. One sees your approach in this, the confluence of different worlds coming together and secretly connecting with one another. The other movement we selected is the second. It's inspired by the lyrics of Cesare Pavese. Can you just share a few thoughts about it before we listen to a bit of it?
Yeah, this was very much influenced by going, in fact, to the Tempio Maggiore in Rome, and also hearing some of the recordings that Leo Levi made, where you hear not just one cantor, but many people chanting together, and this beautiful paradox that we often find, any of us that go to synagogues, is that there is this paradox of everyone is chanting essentially the same melody, but everyone is also in their own world. They have their own connection with prayer, their own connection with God, and so we hear the same melody being sung in a dozen different tempos, dozen different keys, and a dozen different ways of singing. And so there's the paradox of community and individuality, which I think is marvelous. It's unified and it's chaotic. I think it's so symbolic for me of so many things that that define Judaism in one way. And so we hear the orchestra playing the same melody that you hear the cantor that Leo Levi captured, but everyone is sort of doing it in their own way at their own speed. So mirroring that kind of atmosphere that I heard.
Let's play it. You know, for me, listening to this music is really incredible, because I spent I don't know how many months, years in the archives listening to the whole collection, and I also selected some of these recordings for a publication that the Hebrew University put out in, I think it was 2001. It's been reissued a few times. It's you know, in its very specific subgenre, it's been a little bit of a hit. People want to hear this music because it was a mystery until then. And actually, I was very pleased that in selecting audio for your project, you actually use clips from the CD itself. So what I'm hearing from a personal listening perspective, I'm also hearing all the editorial work that was done on the sounds, you know, transferring from reel to reel recording to digital support, and then working in studio. And then I hear also the overlayers of your own work, etc. So it's again, it's many different worlds of sound that
that CD that you curated is really magnificent, and I think that that even imperfections in the recording that sometimes come out are I think, beautiful little clues into what that moment must have been like. That moment when Leo Levi recorded these singers, who going back briefly to what you were saying about the 5 schools, the 5 synagogues, the cinque scuole, that my imagination, and please tell me if I'm wrong here, is that these are men that were recorded in the 1950s, 1960s, 1940s, and so must have studied this tradition already in the 19th century, as they're old men when they were being recorded. So that means that they must have studied this tradition before in the name of progress, the 5 synagogues were torn down to make the Tempio Maggiore, the big synagogue, which is sort of like a Tower of Babel in a way. It's sort of forced all of these different traditions that have their own unique musical heritage together. What do you think about that?
Well, Yotami, especially in the case of Rome, what one hears through these recordings is actually both. One hears both the traditions that had disappeared with the establishment of the new synagogue in 1904, at the dawn of the 20th century, with the idea of taking down the ghetto, taking down the old ways, and shaping something new, something that could be presented to society at large. So one hears the sounds that were there before, so I'm absolutely with you with that. But also at times, and Roman cantors are often mocked in the subculture of Italian cantorial music by their colleagues from other cities and other traditions because of their kind of hieratic style. And a lot of the way they sing, they have these projections of voice like that. And the other cantors say, they think they're in a church. They think they're singing at the Vatican or something. And in a way, that's true, meaning that the sound of the Roman synagogue was developed in the first half of the 20th century to kind of be, it's not easy to have a synagogue in Rome, right? And so to kind of match up with the sounds of the Catholic Church. So we hear that in very unique ways in the Roman community. I was really fascinated when you zeroed in on Rome because of all of these layers of complexity, which you then put forth in exploring the idea of ghetto music. You went on from what we just heard. You went on to explore the concept of ghetto music, ghetto song, and with all the implications that the word ghetto, which, as we know, originates in Venice in the 1500s, but has expanded in so many ways and has all kinds of resounding significance in America, especially, but around the world in urban cultures and subcultures. So you went on to new ghetto music, mixing in all kinds of other things, right?
That's right. And I think that I sort of got hints of this when I was in Rome, that the Roman Jewish community is quite proud in a way of its separation from the Roman general community. I've heard sounds that hint at this almost pride in being apart from the rest of the Roman community, in the sense that helped their musical tradition stay intact in a way. And again, I think that is kind of a doomed proposition. The borders even of a ghetto are porous, even though the Jews were forced to come home every night and be locked into the Roman ghetto, did not prevent the influence of the church on the music. As you say, Francesco, the cantors in Rome sound like they're at the Vatican sometimes. And so in this piece that I wrote in 2011, New Ghetto Music, we hear kind of another influence creeping into the Leo Levi recordings, which is my fascination with the tenores di Bitis, the tenores Sardinian manner of singing. These are 4 men that are huddled together, facing one another with their arms on each other's shoulders, listening very intently and singing in a kind of special tuning that we call just intonation. They make incredible hypnotic, repetitive music that just remains in this cloud, this harmonic cloud, this static harmonic cloud, and it is magnificent. And so we hear the beginning of my new ghetto music through this lens of Sardinia.
And we even have a little bit of an original tenore recording that inspired this, right?
Agonare sorsau, agonare glorioso, quando vi penso reposo, mani, ballare, mani, bella, no, ma, pare la santa, bello garri,
So good.
There's a lot to play with. Yeah.
I couldn't help it.
Yeah. And you continued, you were invited back to explore into Italy to explore ghetto music and their new ghetto songs in 2016. Raiz is essentially a pop star in Italy with Jewish origins and a persona on the Italian music scene. But I see other friends in the video, clarinetist Emanuele Cohen from Rome, who's been doing jazz and Jewish music for years. So just a snippet of this. And do you want to tell us where this was?
Well, this was I can't remember where this was, in Monteverde in Rome in 2016. Just very quickly, I'll say that Raiz, who converted to Judaism, I sort of taught him the about 12 or 15 of the Leo Levi songs, and he simply wrote his own text to them, his own lyrics, sometimes in Neapolitan, and so he is adding his new layer to this palimpsest, and I really love what he does to it. I think it's fantastic. Perhaps we can forward to where it starts singing.
So having fun too in all of this. And yet you went back to the sources and you started a series of compositions under the rubric of Estro Poetico Armonico, which is the title of the 18th century collection of compositions and transcriptions by Benedetto Marcello. So you went back to kind of to where we started our conversation today in a way, and created. You're now at Estro Poetico Armonico number 3, which is going to be premiered this coming week in Montreal. So let's just hear, like, if you can just share a few words about the series, and we're just going to explore each chapter one by one briefly with you.
Right. So as we were saying, Estro Poetico Armonico is the name that Benedetto Marcello, this composer who lived almost the exact same birth and death dates as Bach, but in Venice, and would go in and transcribe what he heard, and then wrote a book of 50 cantatas, each one based on a transcription that he heard of liturgical chanting in Venice. So I took one of these, one of his transcriptions, and sort of made my own transcription of his transcription. It's like, when we hear, and I encourage all of you to hear Benedetto Marcello's Estro Poetico Armonico, which is beautiful. It's totally beautiful. And I love those works, but when you hear them, you can hear, well, this is clearly a work that's firmly rooted in the Venetian Baroque. It sounds like Baroque music. It doesn't particularly sound like some kind of, well, what we could imagine as being 5,000-year-old music passed down on Mount Sinai. So it is a music of its own time and place. And so the same is with my own Estro Poetico Armonico. It's a work that I'm hearing his own transcription of what he heard in the synagogue, which is, of course, their own version of what they heard their parents sing, etc. So it's this kind of telephone game.
And you continue to explore this, I would say, almost concept of Estro Poetico Armonico a few years later. So what happened in this case? How did you keep at it? I'm totally fascinated.
I think that in Estro Poetico Armonico 1, the one that we just heard, you can clearly hear when it goes from Benedetto Marcello to my voice. There's a very clear, I think, line where it passes from the 18th century to the present. And in the second one that I wrote, it's harder to make that to determine where that line is. It's a fuzzy line. Where is these remnants are more hidden, I think, in this work.
I continue to be fascinated by how you're like you found a stream of creativity in this pool of resonating musical sources, and it keeps going. So we were talking earlier about the fact that exactly this coming week you'll be premiering, if everything, all the stars of you know, pandemics and other things align, you'll be premiering this coming Thursday, I think, in Montreal, Estropoetico Armonico #3.
Yeah.
We're gonna play a just a sample from the rehearsal work. So it's
okay.
It's of course not there yet, but can you tell us where you're going with this and what's coming next?
And first, everybody that's listening, if you want to hear the whole thing, it's going to be on Medici TV on the 22nd. And this is a rehearsal recording. This is still half baked here, but it'll give you an idea. The main idea for Estropoetico Armonico 3, after more than 12 years of working with the Leo Levi recordings, I really wanted to do something notably different. And I decided that in many ways I've been looking backwards, primarily in this body of work that has dealt with Leo Levi. This particular one, I decided I really want to look forward and dig on what it means to be not just an Israeli, but just me. What does it mean to be me, to be an Israeli that's lived most of my life not in Israel, that grapples with my faith. And so I've chosen 5 modern Israeli poets and chosen their poetry that deals with that. What does it mean to have faith and to be a modern Israeli? And at the same time, even though Death Will Come, one of the first pieces we heard today, deals with a mezzo-soprano, and the Leo Levi recordings and orchestra very much like this one, the relationship between the mezzo-soprano in this piece and the Leo Levi recordings is completely different. Whereas in Death Will Come, the mezzo is almost in awe of the Leo Levi recordings. She almost doesn't sing when you hear the Leo Levi recordings. The relationship here is very different. It's almost an antagonistic relationship, and that's it in a nutshell. I know we're a little close on time now.
We're doing great, but if you can point us to one of the movements that you would like to play from the rehearsal.
Be my guest.
Or I would go for movement 3 then, as Miles, I think, was already pointed.
So the poem by the way, that we could just barely hear the Leo Levi recordings there because the balance is off, and the mezzo-soprano wasn't at that rehearsal. So that's a very, it's not quite a full picture of what you're getting there, but the poem that she's singing is a night called Night Prayer by a modern poet named Eli Eliyahu. And this night prayer that he writes is really, it's not so much about a prayer to God, but really a prayer for just hoping that everything works out, like just the small things in life, like let all my appliances work, hopefully the roof isn't leaking tomorrow, and little things that we think about that are just part of modern life. And so that in juxtaposition with what we hear what we hear the cantors in the Leo Levi recordings, the Havdalah, is, I think, where some of the power of the text comes in.
Yeah, that's the prayer at the closing of the Sabbath. Again, a recording that I know very well, and I remember editing in very specific way. And again, it's incredible to see this music come to entirely new and unforeseeable life. Trust me, when I was sitting in the archives for many hours and many days and many weeks, I did not expect anything like this. So it's really the power of sounds continues to astonish me. And in a way, and I want to close our conversation by bringing back what we've said to Philharmonia Baroque. This is also the work that we've been doing over the last 5 years with Philharmonia Baroque. This is an example of Philharmonia performing one of the pieces from Marcello's Estropoetico Armonico at Yale University a few years back. And again, we're mixing sort of recreated traditional sounds with the compositional work of Marcello. So I think, Yotam, you and I have been working in parallel ways. Sometimes we meet, sometimes we diverge. And I'm very much looking forward to what will come next, because I know something else will come after this.
Absolutely. So we need to work together finally.
Yeah. Let's put an end to the pandemic so that we can we can meet up and do some work together. But let's close and say goodbye with Philharmonia Baroque performing Marcello. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Francesco.
What we have here, and we actually have a program that will be devoted to this with PBO in a couple of months from now, is actually the melody that this composition is based on is for Hanukkah. But what I really hear are the zampogne, the bagpipes of Central Italian Christmas music that make their way into the synagogue. So you see, we have plenty to work with and a lot to plan. We still have a couple of minutes, I think. I don't know if Miles wants to join us, but a couple of minutes. I don't know if there are any questions from people from home. Thank you so much in the meantime, Yotam, for being with us today.
It's my pleasure, Francesco. I'm looking forward to many more conversations.
The pleasure is all ours, Yotam. I do have to say, in listening to your music, I can tell how much you enjoy unearthing the past, but also honoring and respecting it in a new way. And it's just such fantastic music that you've composed for us. And thank you so much for diving into it and for sharing that with us today. I greatly appreciate it. I do have one question before we leave, and that is, let me bring it up here. So one attendee pointed out how your music is so beautifully atmospheric. Do you have any favorite instrumental extended techniques that help achieve these sound worlds?
No, but I will say that atmosphere is an incredibly important part of my process as a composer. I'm deeply influenced by the architect Peter Zumthor, and a Swiss architect who's written this little slim volume called Atmospheres, and he's deeply interested in contemporary music. And his idea is, as an architect, he starts not by thinking about structure or form, but by atmosphere. The atmosphere is the first thing that comes to him as an architect, and atmosphere is the first thing that comes to me as a composer. It's sort of bigger than the bigger picture. It's the biggest picture that you can take before I think about any small details.
That's very intriguing. Thank you very much for that question. Courtney, do you have a few words to say?
I just wanted to thank Yotam for being here today, and of course to Francesco for always leading us on these incredible journeys through music and culture, and pushing the boundaries. So, and Yotam, it's just an absolute pleasure to meet you. I hope we'll have the opportunity to meet you in person and to work together on something special once this craziness is all over. But thank you, and thank you to all.
Thank you, Courtney.
Attended today. Really appreciate your support. Have a great
And
Sunday.
thanks for all the participants that came. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
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 Thanks so much.
Ciao, Francesco.
Ciao, a presto.